From within the confines of the luxurious ball, the main character, Fereshati Lafireon, watched all the events unfold in the center of the hall. In front of her were other ladies who belonged to noble families, and they were talking among themselves about how Viscount Bertie's wife, whose family constantly reproached her about her descendants, had a lover because her husband did not fulfill his marital duty. There were heavy sighs from the ladies who had been married for some time. They were concerned that their behavior and dress were still being monitored, even though they were daughters of the world. Stopping her sighs, one of the married ladies turned toward Her Highness, Lafirion. The woman decided to ask the very young lady why she continued to keep silent about her marriage, since she had been married for about a year. In a moment, all the ladies present swooped down on her, asking her a bunch of questions. But in a moment, by her silence, she seemed to say that she was not going to answer every question from the ladies. In summary, she said that Ms. Gloria and Ms. Circia were indeed part of their family. She also confirmed rumors of sometimes rude behavior on the part of His Highness. This brought a hint of sympathy to her interlocutors' faces. Continuing to hold the glass of drink in her hands, the main character did not even notice someone's presence behind her, continuing her speech. She was interrupted by the man she was now telling her interlocutors about, who said that he was looking for her. The ladies immediately greeted the Archduke, whose name was Tideo Dane Lafirion. Not even a moment later, the same Archduke enfolded his wife in his arms, reporting the excitement he felt when he lost sight of her. This immediately caused mixed emotions in the girl, which were directed towards dissatisfaction with Tideo's actions. The conversation between the noble ladies was just about to be completed, as His Excellency's son, Sulfus Sultan, burst into the same room, announcing his mother's wishes. Tideo's sister, Circia Jane, joined the conversation, pointing out her brother's rude behavior. And the charming way she looked always shocked the ladies present. But Circia paid no attention to them at all because she was only interested in Fereshati. Fereshati's close family members were to be joined by Tideo's sideline relative, Ayelet, accompanied by her uncle, Phoenix Cone. Even with this idol hanging between all the assembled members of the Lafirion family, the last relative contacted them, telling them that they should not make such a big deal of it. The real head of the family, Gloria E. Lafirion, was not at all happy with what her family had arranged at the luxurious ball. In her opinion, it was not worth it for an elderly woman like her to be present. However, Fereshati made it easier by assuring her that Gloria was full of energy. The woman wondered why, even at the elderly age she had reached, she still made people around her tremble. Sitting down in her seat, Gloria gave Fereshati a choice in the form of Lafirion lands or fossils for saving their family. She still continued to claim that she did not need anything at the hands of her husband's family, which pleased Gloria very much. She was so pleased that, based on similar responses from Fereshati, she suggested that she would give her everything. Such a conversation between rather close members of the Lafirion family made the aristocrats attending the ball applaud the Archduchess. For Fereshati herself, this was a real punishment, because her husband's family's obsession with her was truly unacceptable. A year and a little more than a year before the events that took place at the ball, Fereshati came to His Excellency with a request. The purpose of her visit to his palace was only a small request in the form of a wedding. Addressing the Archduke, she tried to keep her confidence on her face and asked him to agree to a marriage between them for exactly 1 year. Such a request was quite unexpected for everyone, including Fereshati herself, but it still made sense. Fereshati Zahart was an ordinary count's daughter who had nothing special about her personality. These events forced her to face the abyss in her life, completely immersing herself in herself. But even with such a big loss, Fereshati had support behind her. She and Shifa, who extended her an umbrella, had a strong and lasting relationship. He was a real support for her. The stepmother, who was also close to Shif, was no less dear to the girl. And the daughter of a caring stepmother, whose name was Reina, was so dear to Fereshati's heart that she was not afraid to confirm the presence of her own sister. Standing side by side with her family, Fereshati was confident that they would go through tears of joy and sadness together. They were the whole world to her, and she was sure that she had to protect them. Watching the fireworks from the street, Fereshati could only hope that very soon she would be able to see them from the same streets. She was bedridden while one of her closest people, the chief, watched her closely. By supervision, we mean that every time he visited his wife, the husband only wished her to die as soon as possible. She could only watch in silence as her husband told her his whole plan about how he had married for a good deal, and how soon he would receive the entire inheritance as a result of his wife's death. In addition to Shifa, her stepmother and her daughter were also present in the room where Ferishati spent her last hours, if not minutes. The woman observed the rather slow effect of the jeweled curse on the girl, saying that only Ferishati's father was to blame for the events that were unfolding before them. If he hadn't left his entire inheritance to his daughter, she might have survived. The picture before her eyes made her feel dizzy, because right in front of her face she could see an even bigger betrayal on the part of Shif and Reina. Referring to her rival, who was not really like her, Reina, with a malicious smile on her face, said that Shif had married her only at her request. Every moment that Ferishati endured, she hoped that she was not alone in this or that situation, and that her family was with her, who were only acting in the end. All the events that she kept in her memory turned out to be just a lie and a benefit for a not-so-good family. The expectations of a quick death from the curse could have lasted a long time, but all the members of her horrible family had neither the desire nor the time to wait for it. So the stepmother decided to take control of the moment while taking a large pillow in her hands, later covering the frightened face of a poor girl who only wanted happiness. After some time, which flew by in a blink of an eye in Ferishati's mind, she found herself in an unknown place, facing the fact of her own death. But looking around, she realized that her guesses about her own situation were far from reality. The position of her subconscious could only suggest that she was currently dreaming. As she continued to look around her, her golden eyes roaming the corners of the room she was currently in, she noticed only a pile of papers that indicated that her father had recently suffered his death. Asking the same question to all the servants of their estate, they only got the same answer. And the most important thing about her current situation was that at tea parties with her still kind relatives, she noticed only warm smiles in her direction. The feelings she experienced during the evening of her death were still clear in her mind. She hoped that these events were just part of her deep sleep, but she also couldn't deny that her common sense was slowly leaving her. However, on the same day, Shif disproved all her assumptions. When she saw him with a luxurious bouquet of flowers in his hands, she realized everything. Kneeling on the ground in front of her fiancé, Ferishati hid her face, continuing to drop large drops of tears, suggesting that she had returned to the past. The hidden face contained the emotion of joy and some madness as the girl continued to cry, realizing that she was at the moment when her family was only at the stage of building their evil plan. She did not understand why she was alive, but she considered this chance her salvation. She got it in order to protect her life and her inheritance. After the events of that day, she realized her reality and her position in her family. She wanted to leave them all with nothing and take the last of them, but all she could do was ask Shifa to leave her company. Even if she had refused the marriage proposal, she still could not break off her relationship with her fiancé without a reason. Even with all ties to Shif severed, Ferishat still had her stepmother and Reina. Recalling all the words that Shif had said that night, she remembered the curse and wanted to know all the details. Her stepmother's goal was to inherit, so Ferishati wondered why she took control of Shif to get it, forcing him to marry a girl. The girl was brought out of her thoughts by the butler, who opened the door for her and invited her inside the room. Carefully following all the advice she received from her husband, she continued to analyze her situation and came to the conclusion that she still needed time. She does not know how she was killed and will not be sure until she is able to defend herself. However, based on the situation of all the factors, she had to find a remedy that would help her survive, at least for the beginning. She immediately thought of a wedding with a high-ranking person whom she recognized as the Archduke Tideo. Everyone knew that the ancestor of the Lafurian family had gained his position as Grand Duke because of his contribution to the development of the empire. This was not surprising, since he was a close associate of the Imperial family, a leader of military operations, and at the same time a suppressor of rebellions. The current host was Grand Duke Tideo Lafurion, who continued to maintain the appropriate image of their family. During the war with the Kingdom of Schwarz, everyone believed that the kingdom's victory was foreseen, but the enemy was quite strong. When people were already tired of the years-long confrontation, the great Duke Lafurion and his knights joined the battle. Not long after this annexation, the Schwarz kingdom was destroyed. The people proclaimed Duke Lafurion a true hero of the empire. After the war, the Grand Duke decided to visit the capital for a short time and then return to his domain. All the people who were on the square and wanted to see their hero felt a mixed sense of trepidation and delight. Frankly speaking, Duke Lafurion was not a real hero, and joined this battle only for its content, not for seeing the consequences. Returning to the events that Ferashati was currently involved in, Archduke Tideo once again asked her the purpose of her visit. Holding her trembling hands tightly, the girl listened attentively to her interlocutor. When he said that he was really interested to know the reason for the guest's visit, hearing her answer, he immediately became curious to know the reasons for their wedding. Following the rumors about the Archduke of Lafon, Ferashati knew that he had married before. However, the marriage to the girl he had been courting for a long time only went through after she ran away, saying that the Duke was just a terrible person. Some people said that all the time before and after the divorce, Archduke Tideo had been too rude to her. But even knowing all of His Excellency's shortcomings, Ferashati was sure that she needed this man because he was not interested in obtaining someone else's succession and, according to rumors, in having close ties to women. Trying to explain the situation to him as quickly as possible, Ferashati said that her family wanted to kill her in order to take over the entire inheritance. However, interrupting his guest, His Excellency asked her if she had really dared to travel so far to tell him such a thing. It was a rhetorical question, so after a moment there was silence between them. Tideo broke it off, telling her that she was too worried about the succession and that it was not worth it. After this conclusion, he stood up from his seat and said that Ferashati was free to go. When he was about to leave the room they were in together, she realized that this was her last chance. So in a moment, her trembling hand was on the Archduke's arm, trying to stop him. His Excellency immediately disapproved of such actions, pushing the guest's hand away from him. A moment later, Ferashati saw the blood that remained on her ring. It turned out that she had unintentionally injured Tideo with such a sudden movement. Do not waste time and immediately apologize for your rash behavior. Instead, she heard a rude response from Tideo, who told her that she shouldn't waste his time and should get out of there as soon as possible. Even if she heard the final answer from her interlocutor, she did not want to stop and continued to speak in his direction. She knew that in order to overcome all the obstacles in his way, His Excellency needed to remarry. This was due to the reason why the Grand Duke had returned to the capital in the past, because he did not want to marry the Empress. The Emperor used to summon the Grand Duke to the capital quite often to marry him to his daughter. He hoped that in this way he could protect the young Empress. But even the Emperor's approval did not change the Archduke's mind, as he found everything related to marriage alien. The wedding ceremony was quickly ended due to the Duke's inability to control his facial expressions, and the young Empress's comment that she did not like the man next to her. But in order to prevent this marriage ceremony, the Duke had to marry another lady along with the Emperor's seventh daughter. However, based on what came out of his mouth, Ferashati already regretted asking such a question, feeling the piercing gaze of His Excellency. Still, she decided to continue talking, relying on the fact that she could not leave the Lafon estate without receiving a positive answer. She reiterated all the reasons for the wedding that were favorable to the Archduke, waiting for his response. But in response, she was asked how she knew this information. However, not even knowing how to answer, because she could only hear this in the future, she only said that she needed Tideo as much as he needed her. Repeatedly, she asked for only 1 year, after which they could easily dissolve their marriage, remaining free to decide their future. Staying at some distance from the Archduke, Ferashati sincerely hoped to hear a positive answer, but she was still nervous. But after a moment of anticipation, her mind was pierced by thoughts that nothing would work out and that her stepmother would figure it out, if she hadn't already. She was faced with the question of whether she could trust the Count's people, or whether they had become her stepmother's pawns. Suddenly, the girl was brought out of her terrible thoughts by the voice of His Excellency, who informed her that Ferashati did not understand one thing. The Emperor did not want to marry his seventh daughter to Tideo Lafon, as he wanted to do so with his fourth. In addition, the man began to lose patience with his guests, repeating the same things. Starting to walk confidently toward the exit of the room, Tideo left the guest of his mansion alone with his thoughts. Her face was frozen with the emotion of surprise and confusion, as she continued to hope that the situation was unreal. She refused to believe that she was almost alone, and kept her eyes on the owner of the estate. But suddenly, everything around her was no longer red, and she began to tremble. With the same mute emotion of surprise and confusion, Ferashati slowly began to approach the floor, until she was conscious and hit a hard rock under her body. That's when that stupid memory from the future came back to her, and she couldn't move. The Duke was able to react quickly, running toward Ferashati, as she assumed she was on the verge of death again. While digging a hole for the coffin, Two men were in the heavy rain, discussing the fact of another human death. One of them said that he was sorry for such a fate for such a young girl. But a moment later, behind them, they heard lightning strike the ground. The blow was not so strong that it could revive the dead girl. Noticing this, the two men also let out an equally loud scream, matching the girls. The dead girl turned out to be Ferashati. The girl was looking at herself in a deep pit, not realizing what was happening to her. At that moment, when everything in front of her eyes turned red and started moving frantically, she thought she was dead, but now she was all dirty, confused, and alive. The two men who had been standing over the dug hole a moment ago were already in front of Duke Lafon. Being frightened and completely confused, they claimed that the dead girl was a witch and was quite unexpectedly alive. Such statements were unexpected for the man, but in a moment he was a little less frightened than his subordinates. Looking around, Ferashati decided to discover her location, but then realized that she was going to be buried. This was also observed by the Duke, who arrived with his knights to verify all the statements made by the two surprised men. Looking outside the fossil pit, she saw all those present, who were also in awe, but the only thing she could assume at that moment was that he had decided to get rid of her, because she was too annoying. While examining Ferashati, he commented on what was really strange, her sudden discovery of life. But suddenly he stretched out his hand to the girl, trying to help her get out of the pit. Realizing how this looks in the eyes of a frightened woman, he said that he really did not want this to happen, and suggested that she leave her location first. This seemed strange to her, but at the same time she accepted the offer, concluding for herself that the Duke was not trying to end her life. Already at the Lafon estate, the girl was finally able to come to her senses and understand everything. She realized that she shouldn't have trusted the man based on memories from the past, but it was also reckless of him to put the man underground alive. Left alone with the perpetrator of the recent events, the girl asked him if he really wanted to kill her, but he didn't even plan to answer this question, shifting the topic to Ferashati's bad habits, pointing to her nails. After confirming his bad habit, the man showed the guest the wound on his arm that she had left as a result of her attempt to grab him. While the girl continued to not understand what her interlocutor was getting at, Tideo replied that he would look at her newly proposed proposal, holding a fountain pen in his hands. Such a question was not important to her at the moment, because she had recently almost died at the hands of the Archduke. But all her loud words were instantly stopped by the fact that she used this very pen to write her hand without any emotion. As he got closer and closer to Ferashati, Tideo said that the most important thing now was how she would pass the test. Even before she had time to react to the previous words from His Excellency's mouth, she instantly felt the taste of iron on her lips. Seconds, minutes, or even hours later, Ferashati woke up in an unknown room, covered with a blanket and lying on a bed. A moment later, she was called by Tideo, who informed her that she had finally woken up, which also added to the girl's surprise, which was a drop of fear. During her fright, she also noticed two maids standing next to the bed where she was lying, besides her husband, but he ordered them to leave a moment later, commenting that their work had been done properly. The girl continued to watch all this, wondering why, having experienced such pain, which was equivalent to death, she was still alive. Based on the fact that the same Duke was in front of her, she couldn't move back to the past, but that was all that led her to a dead end. Clutching the edge of the sheet, she asked Tideo why he was trying to kill her and bring her back to life. But the man, not wanting to waste time, replied that the Lafon family carries a powerful curse. The man said that everyone who was born with their family's blood had poison in their bodies, which is why they are somewhat immune to ordinary poisons, and only a few drops of their blood can really kill a person. This information brought only a mute look of questioning on the face of the Lafon household, along with excitement. For a moment, Ferashati remembered that the Lafons had always been called a cursed family in articles, but no one knew if this information was true. The Grand Duke won the war and led the empire to victory, but after that there were rumors that people who were close to the Lafon family did not live a long and happy life. The Lafon family received the title of cursed because people were afraid of them, especially their red burning eyes. It followed that she soon recalled how she had touched her ring, which had the Archduke's blood on it, and then, using her bad habit, unexpectedly swallowed the poison. This is probably why the Duke assumed that Ferashati was dead and decided to bury her. He confirmed all her guesses, and then said that the test was part of his plan to make sure that real miracles were happening. The girl now knew the hidden secret of the Lafon family, and she already had a premonition of something bad. Turning to Tideo, she claimed that she hadn't heard anything, and that she had deleted such a conversation from her memory once and for all. Her face grew more disturbed with every word the Duke said that he had tried to refuse the offer Ferashati had made because of this very secret. But now he could not help himself. When he got up from his seat and began to walk toward the guest, Ferashati hid her face behind her hands, begging for mercy. But with a calm smile on his face, Tideo confirmed the girl's earlier proposal, agreeing to make her his wife for exactly 1 year. Squeezing his daughter's small hand, Count Zahart promised that he would never hurt her. These were the words little Ferashati heard almost every day after she lost her mother. Based on this, Ferashati still wanted to know the reason why her father had suddenly brought her stepmother and Reina, who were not related to their family in any way. Last time, before her own wedding, she also visited her father, reporting on her successes in life. Suddenly, her family members appeared behind her back, telling her that it was too difficult to continue to be responsible for the entire county on her own, and suggesting that she hire a representative. It reported that it still cannot calm down, seeing Ferashati suffering alone. She could no longer interpret the suggestion to find a representative whom she could trust as a concern, and saw it as an intention to hire someone to kill her. The girl returned to her stepmother, handing her an envelope that was sealed with a red seal, which raised some questions on the woman's face. As she unwrapped the envelope in front of her daughter and Schiff, with the appropriate question about the contents, Ferashati was able to move away some distance, heading in the other direction. As they all continued to read the contents of the letter, which was addressed to them, their expressions gradually changed to more surprised ones. Being engaged at the same distance, the girl, with a rather calm face, said that she had decided to marry the Duke of Lafon. It turned out that from that moment on, their paths with Schiff were severed. Starting to move towards the girl, her mother and sister argued that she could not have cut everything short so quickly, behaving rudely even over a simple quarrel with Sir Schiff. As they continued to try to stop Ferashati, the girl herself said that her uncle from the west had decided to come as a representative of the maternal line. This meant that my stepmother and Rena had to leave the main building, and no one else was allowed to be in the house. As a result of Ferashati's refusal, Schiff, who had previously been an ordinary knight, lost the opportunity to be selected for the position of Knight of the Empire, as only nobles could become them. But we shouldn't forget that this was only the beginning, and the girl would make sure that they lost even more in the future. At first glance, it seemed that the Duke's meeting with his wife was fateful, but they fell in love at first sight. But in fact, this contract was concluded for reasons of guaranteeing Ferashati's safety for exactly 1 year, and gave the Duke the opportunity to ethically examine the girl's body, which was immune to the curse. Based on the conditions that the girl had set, this wedding was not real, so that's what she would have to deal with. But now their incredible wedding was coming to an end. After their fake wedding had come to an end, Duke Lafon was called by his knights to follow them. Walking next to her now husband, Ferashati's face began to tear up. Finally, the girl experienced a lightness of heart after enduring so many difficulties along the way. But it is also equally interesting to see how difficult it was to prepare the wedding in 3 days, which the Duke announced after Ferashati woke up. Their wedding outfits were too revealing, so much so that they spoiled the impression, but the girl was glad that she could already change. It was through this showy outfit that one could understand the looks of all the guests present, which pierced through the bride and groom. In turn, this wedding gave the Duke the opportunity to get rid of the Emperor's offer to marry his daughter. But at the same time, it gave rise to speculation among the guests that there was most likely a secret interest in this situation. When he asked his companion if she had any plans to extend their contract, he looked at her with a rather calm look, not even expecting to hear anything. However, she promised me with a happy smile on her face that she would think about it. Although in reality, her soul hid some uncertainty that she would be able to live beyond the year. Turning to her husband, she had another question about the same curse. She recalled that she clearly remembered hearing from Shifa on the day of her first death that her death was due to a curse. Even the pain she felt during her last moments before her death was too similar to the pain of the Lafon family's curse. She wanted to dispel her doubts by asking her husband. She wanted to know if anyone in the Lafon family was selling their own blood as poison, but at the same time, she realized that if she really asked him about this, she would cause him to become angry. So I decided to just be about a similar way of learning and go a little further, leaving Tideo behind. The girl assured herself that this was definitely not acceptable in the house of a descendant of a great duke. leaving behind her that very descendant with questions about her behavior. Walking a little further down the street, Farashati noticed a rather crowded road in front of her, so she hurried to get closer to her husband, planning to get away from this very street so that they would not be noticed. But suddenly, the Duke was called out, stopping him and drawing his attention to himself. Ina Castor, aka the fourth princess of Dodalea, to whom the emperor wanted Tideo to marry, appeared right behind them. Her expression was not very friendly, so they thought they were about to have an argument. This particular daughter of the emperor was known for being born with very poor health, which made it impossible for her to get out of bed. She was unlucky and was doomed to a slow death. However, the future changed in an unknown way, and it seems that all the rumors about her recovery were true, because she was right in front of them. However, apart from this, Farashati was also confused by the fact that the fourth daughter of the emperor addressed her companion as a Grand Duke, even though several decades had not passed since he had inherited the title of Duke. Addressing Her Highness in accordance with all the aristocratic requirements, the man wanted to ask the young lady how she got here, but without even thinking about answering this question, she began to clutch her umbrella, asking the Duke if he had really chosen someone other than her as his wife, because in her opinion, there were no other ladies in the world who could love the Duke more than she did. All this time, Farashati thought that the wedding between the emperor's daughter and the Duke was an order from the emperor, but it turns out that the entire initiative rests on the shoulders of Her Highness. But watching the reaction to all the words of Her Young Highness, she could see how serious Tideo's face was. Observing his interlocutor from a long distance between them, the man heard words about how Ina lives without him for a day. The emperor's fourth daughter's gaze grew crazier and crazier as she mumbled the words that the Duke was her husband. But suddenly their conversation was interrupted by a surprised Farashati, who could not restrain her emotions from making similar statements, and let out a sigh. Thus, the girl attracted the attention of her sworn enemy when she began to angrily shout at her, saying that she did not even want to see her. At the loud noise, Sersia also came and greeted Her Highness the Princess. After greeting them, she kept coming closer and closer to them, asking questions about whether I should see people who were going to court a married man. She wanted to know Her Highness's opinion on whether it was really acceptable for everyone to see such things. According to all the noise that unfolded in the middle of the street, a crowd gathered. With the help of the fuss his sister made, Tideo was able to find the right moment to say goodbye to the unwanted interlocutor and leave her company as soon as possible, staying with his wife. Starting to move away from Her Highness, Tideo put his arm around Farashati's shoulders, quietly disappearing from Ina's view. While she continued to threaten the Archduke with the fact that they were not going to live without him, the day would eventually come when he would realize that she was no less necessary to him. Although Farashati's companion did not react in any way to these words coming from the princess's lips, the girl herself felt some excitement. She could not even imagine that the princess was so obsessed with the Grand Duke. So now she was interested in what exactly had happened between them and was happening now. But even so, Ina was not going to leave Tideo alone, and she only asked her to wait a year. At the same time, 3 members of the Lafon family were traveling to an unknown destination by carriage. During the trip, she reflected on the fact that her 2 companions looked like a real family when they walked together into the apartment. Deciding to thank her for her help, Tideo directed his wife toward his sister, telling her that she was the one to thank. Although the woman in front of Farashati looked rather rough compared to her brother, her greeting was quite gentle. She said she was glad to meet him. Her interlocutor responded in kind, answering Circe's next question in the affirmative, saying that the curse did not work on her.
But Circe also had another question where Shati could have told her new relative the whole truth or simply said that she loved him.
However, while she was thinking about her answer, time passed, and Tideo took over the responsibility for answering this question. However, based on her brother's response, Circe said that she would not believe such a lie. This was not enough for a lie. Everyone in the empire understood perfectly well that this wedding was being organized at such a fast pace in order to prevent the will of the emperor. The lady was worried about whether it was really necessary because it significantly shook their already not impeccable reputation. She was worried about rumors in secular society. She was troubled by the fact that the emperor had convinced him to marry in this way, by the fact that it seemed to bother her brother more than they did. This is how the Grand Duke disgraces his family. As the carriage fell silent, Farashati hoped that her companion would say something. He could have objected to his sister, by telling her that he had fallen in love with his companion, relying on the fact that she was resistant to the curse. Looking at the clothes of the entire Lafon family, Ferashati noticed that all of them wore only tight-fitting clothes. Starting to examine Sergia's behavior quite closely, she noticed that the woman was feeling stuffy, not hot. Having decided to approach the window and open it just a little, the girl's behavior made her companions wonder about her actions. But a moment after she did so, the carriage swayed, and she immediately bounced off the window, stopping near the Duke's face. She noticed that her head had touched Tideo's face, and she wanted to make sure that he was okay. This behavior of the girl, who was trying to make sure that her actions had harmed her husband, made Sergia laugh. Reacting to this, Ferashati and Tideo looked up, looking back at the woman who thought her brother was looking stupid now. Although the girl did not want to, she left a good impression, which also improved the Duke's mood, although his face remained angry. As she looked around the vast property to which the carriage with the Lafon family members was heading, the girl continued to react violently to the sheer size of the estate in which she was to live. One of the family's knights approached the carriage door, saying that they had already arrived at the designated place, but could not go any further because of the unrest at the entrance. Looking in the direction they were supposed to go, all the people in the carriage noticed Sultan Sulfus, who was the heir to Lafon. But there was also a person with him who was pleasing to Ferashati's eyes. In a moment, the Duke left the carriage, saying that he would be back very soon, leaving the ladies alone. Through the shadows, the face of the same, not the most pleasant guest of the Lafon estate appeared, but it was recognizable as Schiff. All the while standing in front of the knights and Sulfus Sultan, the man kept calling Ferashati, begging her for just one last meeting, repeatedly telling the unwanted guests that he had no right to be on this land. The young heir was beginning to run out of patience. But despite all the warnings from one member of a well-known influential family, Schiff rushed past him in a flash, claiming that this meeting was a must. Grabbing a sword that belonged to one of the knights, Sulfus's patience was exhausted. But he was serious about Shifa. He kept repeating that people in this form do not belong in these lands, but if Schiff let these words pass without giving them due importance, he was choosing certain death. Raising the weapon up, the boy was about to hit the man, explaining his behavior by saying that he was avenging an insult to the Lafon family. Although his small hand held the sword quite confidently, it was still possible to stop it. And that is exactly what Tideo did. While His Excellency was leaving the young heir unarmed, Ferashati stepped forward in front of them. He offered to talk to the girl, but she refused in every possible way, saying that her heart no longer felt anything for the man in front of her.
However, Shiva was not satisfied with this.
Clenching his fist and calming his dust, the knight asked the girl if she knew that the soldiers were forming a procession before the event, and that he would be participating. The man suggested that his crush attend such a performance, which only made her laugh nervously. Tideo joined their conversation, asking his companion if she wanted this handsome knight to leave their company not too slowly. A moment later, a positive answer came from her lips, which caused the same knight to look desperate on his face. Although he was being held tightly by the knights of the Lafon family, he continued to speak in Ferashati's direction, saying that he would wait by the tree where they met every time. Gradually moving away from Shifa, the girl continued to beg him in her mind to finally calm down and accept her refusal. This was not the behavior of a respectable knight and her former lover. Interrupting the silence between him and the girl, His Excellency asked her a question about whether this handsome knight was her future murderer. Soon enough, a confirmatory answer came from her lips, which caused an even more awkward atmosphere between them. In response, Tideo did not know what to say, so he asked the girl to forget about the conversation. Leaving Ferashati's company, His Excellency said that he was going to have a serious conversation with Sulfus. However, sitting at a large table filled with a variety of food, the girl seemed to wonder if she could start the meal alone, having been waiting for her husband for 2 hours. But besides this, she was also worried that Schiff might start following her, given that he could have gotten into the mansion. His action made her look good in front of the Lafon family, and now she wondered how she could face the people who really lived there while causing them so much trouble. Fashera became a Grand Duchess so quickly that even the estate workers were at first confused, not knowing how to behave. She was also worried about Sulfus, because she had heard earlier that the heir to Lafon had been recuperating for quite some time on the outskirts of the city. As she was reflecting on all the secrets of her current family, Her thoughts were interrupted by a rather sharp sound of a door behind her. The Grand Duke entered the dining room, accompanied by one of his butlers. Upon his arrival, the atmosphere in the room became even more tense, no different from all the other occasions. A moment later, the man took a seat next to the girl at the head of the table. Noticing that only the butler entered the room with him, Ferashati decided to ask where the child had gone. To which I heard the answer that Sulfus refused to host the meal. This was expected, as long as the guilt was on Tideo's shoulders. She decided to continue the conversation about the child, determined to learn a little more about him from an adult. When she asked about Sulfus's age, she heard that he was currently 9 years old. After that, she asked the Duke the question that had been on her mind all evening, whether she was his blood child. The fact that the Duke had a marriage that lasted only 2 months could not have predicted that he had such an adult child, but the girl was only confused by the fact that they looked alike. The girl was interrupted in her thoughts about her illegitimate son by the Duke himself, who had heard this question too many times. Although they had been married for only a year, since the girl was now part of the family, he had to tell her. He admitted that Sulfus was his brother's son, which only caused a slight surprise on Ferashati's face. But in a moment, the surprise turned into shame, as the girl assumed quite dramatic things, overlooking quite ordinary facts. And with a rather nervous expression on her face, the girl decided to ask the Duke where exactly his brother had gone, if the man had taken responsibility for raising the child on his own shoulders. A moment later, he answered that his brother was dead. His wife had abandoned Sulfus and run away, and Tideo had no choice but to adopt him and make him the heir to the family. Although it was not the dramatic story Ferashati had imagined, it still made her feel some guilt for the fate of a very young child. But for now, she was more concerned with how the Lafon family had managed to hide such a large-scale secret. As the girl remained lost in thought, Tideo informed her that Sulfus would soon be leaving the estate again and traveling outside the city, so he would not cause any trouble. Standing up from her seat, Ferashati could no longer stand the eerie atmosphere that hung between the two of them, so she decided to leave the meal first. Already at the door to the exit, she was met by a maid who offered to escort her to her own room, but she carefully refused, as she wanted to be alone for the time being. As she walked up the stairs, she looked very gloomy, because she had made mistakes again. The more she tries to penetrate the atmosphere and history of the Lafon family, the more terrified she feels. Her worries about the child's fate were interrupted when she noticed a maid at the door. Suddenly, she called out to the same girl, asking her what she was doing here. The maid greeted Her Highness the Grand Duchess, and the girl asked her whose room she was currently in. The woman replied that this room belonged to young Sulfus, and she was only doing her duty by serving him his dinner. Like the maid herself, Ferashati was equally concerned that the boy refused to open because he was too upset about that serious conversation with Tideo. She recalled how gloomy his face looked as he walked to his room. If Schiff hadn't come to the Lafon estate and made a scene, Sulfus wouldn't have been scolded. After a moment, she wondered what she could do to improve the boy's mood, so she asked the maid to leave the boy's dinner cart and leave. A moment later, the door to the young heir's room opened and a girl entered. He was extremely unhappy until he saw her face. Sitting down on his bed next to him, the girl introduced herself by her own name, saying that they had never had the chance to meet in person. After that, a little boy asked her if she was doing it just to make the great count think she was beautiful. The guy said that if he were the girl, he would not even dare to think about entering such an estate, based on the girl's background. He got up from the bed, concluding all his comments by saying that no one should be friendly and assertive around him, but also leave him alone. Drawing Sulfus's attention to herself, the girl made his face turn toward her, but noticing the traces of bitter tears, Ferashati moved closer to him, almost touching his cheek with her hand. But she couldn't even miss that such actions would make the boy feel a shiver all over his body. She apologized to him for frightening her, but the boy did not want to hear anything, only grabbed the guest of his own room by the skirt of her dress and led her to the exit. Pushing her out of his room through the half-open door, Sulfus let all the words of the Duchess pass his ears. Already at the almost closed door, looking at the floor, the guy said that the girl shouldn't even try to show any interest in him anymore. Being on the other side of the door, the girl still seemed to have a question in relation to the offended boy. But suddenly, right from the middle of the corridor, I heard the maids keep calling out for Her Highness, trying to find her. Without even looking up from them, the girl asked what the point of their search was. Her question was answered with a response that made her look in their direction, rounding her eyes. Already inside the Duke's room, Farashati put her thoughts in order, preparing herself mentally for their wedding night. She frankly hoped that the rumors about His Excellency's complete disinterest in women were true, so she assumed that this night would be like any other. Before she could even think about the fact that there were many empty rooms in the house and that she should offer the Duke to live separately, he appeared behind her. Looking completely embarrassed, the girl asked if he was surprised by her presence. She quickly spoke her thoughts about the individual rooms, trying not to make eye contact with the red ones. But a moment later, Tideo grabbed her by the hand she was using to hide her embarrassed face. He saw no point in their wedding today if they were going to live in separate rooms anyway, not wanting to run into each other again. If the rumors about their wedding night become widely publicized, this will help them to deflect unnecessary suspicion. Even after their contract is finalized and their divorce is granted, the Emperor, observing the sadness Tideo feels after his failed attempt to build a family, will not be able to force him to remarry. That's why they have to keep their room together until their contract is terminated, which is scheduled for a year from now. As she considered where she should sleep tonight, her eyes fell on the couch, which looked quite soft. However, the Duke himself insisted that Farashati spend the night in bed, because in the morning they would be subjected to piercing glances filled with the desire to know the truth. Paying special attention to the fact that Tideo puts on gloves even before taking a break, she wondered if it was related to her recent death. In bed, Farashati couldn't sleep, keeping all the excitement in her mind. Even though she was terribly tired, she couldn't get all the things she had to take care of out of her mind. Tideo seemed to be too preoccupied for normal conversation, but his voice behind Farashati disproved this. He noted that while observing the behavior of his older sister, Circia, he noticed that she appreciated his companion piece. Holding some papers in his hands, he noted that the title of Duchess had belonged to her from the very beginning. But after losing her entire family to her own curse, she fell into a despair that made her feel senseless. As a result, she lost the ability to do her job properly, voluntarily renounced her title, and locked herself in her room, unwilling to go out in public. Tideo, in turn, was worried about his sister and took over some of the Grand Duke's affairs. Now she could take a walk in the sun, which made her brother very happy. But even so, she still reproached her brother, wanting to respect his choice because she was worried about her family. Farashati assumed that the Duke shared this information with her because he was worried about her, based on what had happened that day. But this made her feel even more uncomfortable because the Duke himself had opened his soul to her of his own free will. The girl was worried that she might have been too hasty in her actions, wanting to take revenge as soon as possible. At the moment, she was haunted by doubts even about whether she had really gone back in time. Even if she had found another way, she would not have been able to solve anything because she was the center of all these problems. She assumed that it was just a coincidence, and that all events were unfolding in the same way as in her past life. She could have assumed that her whole choice was a big mistake. She realized that she shouldn't have despaired and should have gathered all her strength. But her soul was becoming more fragile with each passing moment. Even when he heard Farashati's quiet sobs, the man could not do anything, staying away. In a terrible nightmare, the girl was visited by Schiff, who kept saying that only if the girl died would he be able to become happy, and she, being completely in love with him, would be able to fulfill this desire. Next to him was Reina, who repeated all those criticisms about her sister's naivety, and next to them stood the same stepmother who blamed Farashati's father for all the problems, saying that they would definitely take care of the inheritance that the girl had died. But watching all this, the girl did not understand what exactly her mistake was. She couldn't even imagine what she had done wrong to deserve to die. The dream ended when the girl got up from her pillow, continuing to take big sighs. He was the one who woke her up, noticing how restlessly Farashati was sleeping and trying to help her come to. A moment later, one of his subordinates, Moulton, entered the Duke's room shouting and not wanting to wait a minute to express his displeasure. The man said that the Duke still managed to cause trouble for their family during the time he was away. However, he was able to refrain from further commenting on his dissatisfaction when he saw a rather unusual picture in front of him. Moulton could not even imagine that the newlyweds were hiding behind the door, which was always closed. Together with the estate servants who had gathered at the door to the Duke's resting place, the young heir also made his way to the door. However, quickly closing the door behind him, the butler turned to Sulfus again, telling him that they had to leave first. Still in a half-asleep state, she did not immediately realize the situation. However, the moment the butler left the room, she had the opportunity to look around her, watching the Duke seize the moment. Thus, while sitting at the table preparing for breakfast, Ferashati wondered what exactly she was doing, because she ended up causing only chaos. But in addition to her own thoughts, the girl also heard the shouts coming from the man's mouth at the Grand Duke. The man was unhappy that Tideo had freely married after being exiled to the duchy alone. Paying attention to the very small damage that remained on the Duke's face as a result of Ferashati's realization of the situation in the morning and her decision to leave quickly, Moulton noted that the Duke could not visit the Imperial Palace with a similar scratch. Tideo himself ignored all his butler's remarks, saying that he had prepared another carriage. The reason for this was that today, Sulfus was to leave the Lafon estate to go to a villa in the countryside. Apologizing for his unauthorized behavior, the boy asked His Excellency's permission to stay within the estate, saying that he would be quiet from now on. In addition to this, Sulfus noticed that yesterday he hadn't really planned to do any harm to that knight. At that moment, he was only using a surge of emotion and did not evaluate his actions soberly. Rising from his seat, Tideo said that this decision was provoked by the fact that the boy could have been injured by giving away the secret of their family. If Sulfus really felt guilty for such actions, he should have obeyed all the orders that came from Tideo's mouth. Watching this, the girl wondered why the Grand Duke disliked Sulfus so much, and from this, it was clear why he had made him his heir. The boy himself asked similar questions. He wondered why the Duke had adopted him in the first place, only to abandon him again. Lowering his head down, he admitted that he did not want to be alone while in that villa. Watching the boy slowly start to move away from the table, Ferashati noted that she had learned that he had lost his appetite and that the Duke would prefer to talk to him after the meal. However, ignoring everything the girl said to him, the man said that the boy needed to leave the apartment as soon as possible. But he also noted that the girl did not have a similar problem. Leaving the table, the Duke ordered his butler to give the Grand Duchess a short tour and at the same time began to teach her. Already in the corridor, the man apologized for his morning rudeness and introduced himself as Viscount Bach Moulton. His excuse for apologizing was that he was in a hurry to get back to the apartment as soon as possible and that he behaved very improperly because of this hurry. When the girl remarked that everything was fine, Moulton said that she should let the formalities go, as he was one of his subordinates. It was only after hearing these words that Ferashati felt calm and relieved, which had been a strange emotion for her for some time. On the way to the tour, a man would walk in front of the Grand Duchess, telling her that this room was used as a living room. Deciding to ask the man where exactly His Excellency was headed, the girl began to answer that he had plans to meet him today. At the same time, the girl asked Moulton a question about Tideo's dislike of Sulfus. However, in response, she heard that it did not sound like hatred, but rather excitement. Moulton's family has long served the Lafon family, which is why the man was aware of all their duties. Also, the butler was already aware that the Duke's current wife was also aware of the family secret of Lafon. After a moment of silence between them, the man said that Sulfus carries an extraordinary amount of his own poison, and because he is still too young, this poison affects his condition. Simply put, this strong influence of the poison does not leave young Sulfus alone. This is the reason why His Excellency sent his son to the settlement, so that he would not interact with people and could gain strength. This was another secret of the Duke's love for Sulfus, which meant that Ferashati did not have to worry about Tideo's attitude toward the child. Although such love is not entirely clear to both the butler and the Grand Duchess, the next step in their tour was to be the garden, to which Moulton led the girl. However, Ferashati's thoughts were completely unrelated to reality. She wondered why, while taking care of the child, the Duke should commit contradictory acts. Even saying in our favor that such actions are a salvation for Sulfus, but looking at the guy's condition, we can say that it only causes him stress. It was still a mystery to the girl why the Duke would not find a solution that would benefit the young heir. As usual, and a quiet excursion that was a cause for reflection for the girl, she and the butler's attention was drawn to a loud sound that was running behind them. On his way up to the second floor, the man noticed the puzzled maid standing at the door to Sulfus's room. When asked by the butler what was going on, they replied that the young heir was in a very aggressive state, continuing to smash up his own room. He had injured his own arm, cutting the maid's, when she tried to help him. Moulton ordered the maids to quickly contact His Excellency and inform him of the situation, as he was not supposed to reach the Emperor's palace. Addressing the butler, Ferashati said that she intended to go inside the room, ordering the man to make sure that one of the maids was unharmed. However, he abruptly refused the Grand Duchess, saying that it was too dangerous a decision. While he was trying to stop the girl, she told him that if he was really that close to the Duke, he should have heard her story. There was no one in that room but her, who really dared to do such a thing, and she, in turn, could not leave her wounded child in danger. As soon as Farashati entered Sulfus's room, she immediately felt all the anger in his eyes when he threw an unknown object at her. Turning toward the guest from his own room, he noticed that it was not a maid or butler, so he was very surprised. All the while, he kept looking at the girl and asking her if she really thought it was so funny. Repeating his request for the second time, which apparently is no longer an order, he asked me not to show any more interest in him, hiding under the blanket. Looking around her, wandering her eyes all over the room, the girl really saw a complete mess and quite large drops of blood. Sitting down next to the frightened boy, the girl said that she was not doing this because she was looking down on him. She went to his room only to help him and treat his wounds. But he quickly jumped away, crawling out from under that sheet, pushing Farashati away as well. His gaze fell on the girl as he ran away, and Sulfus saw the damage on her forehead from the object he had thrown in a random direction. Through the boyfriend's comments, the girl also drew attention to this injury, after which she heard the boyfriend's tearful request that she not tell the Duke about the incident. He said that if His Excellency learned that the boy had harmed someone as a result of uncontrolled actions, he would expel him. At this time, Farashati herself calmed the boy down, promising to keep this little secret hidden from Tideo. After she was able to calm him down, she quickly moved on to treat his injuries, which were not as bad as they looked. She realized that in any case they would heal, but the child's condition would not change. She could observe that even up to that point, Sulfus had behaved identically. It was as if the whole world would cease to exist for him if the Grand Duke despised him. Farashati suggested that they join forces and together ask His Excellency to leave Sulfus within the estate, thus giving them more time to talk. The boy did not understand why the unknown girl was trying to go against the will of His Highness and feel sorry for the child. He asked his interlocutor to finish her performance if she was doing it to please the Duke, because the man himself considered Sulfus useless. Farashati asked the boy where he got his reasons for such thoughts, to which he replied that he could hear all the topics of conversation of the servants of their estate. In a moment, the hands that a moment ago were applying bandages to all the injuries on the guy's arm found themselves on his cheeks. It was as if the girl did not hear all the requests from the boy to stop, but continued to hold him tightly by the skin. She said that yesterday, thanks to Sulfus, she was able to get rid of the annoying knight and wanted to know if it really belonged to the child. However, the latter, looking down, asserted that the credit was entirely due to His Excellency. But, looking at him with a keen gaze, Farashati asked him to stop contradicting her words in everything, even if they were not true. Until yesterday, her thoughts were similar to those of Sulfus, but now she felt the need to change her own mind. If his unhelpfulness, according to His Excellency, was the reason for all the mess in the boy's room, the girl ordered him not to do it again. Releasing the boy's face from her palms, the girl said that they would have to talk to His Excellency about Sulfus's departure after he returned. But a moment later, one of the child's palms was on the site of Farashati's injury, as he reported that blood was beginning to form again from her wound. Trying to remove the small palm from her face, the girl continued to say that everything was fine, although the wound continued to hurt. As she continued to examine him, she noticed more injuries on his arm that she had missed. The boy asked Farashati if she knew what all his blood was. She replied that everything would be fine, even if she drank it. Asking what the girl meant by, okay, she was about to tell the guy that he didn't know about it yet. But a moment later, a rather thick stream of blood gushed from her nose. The girl was in quite a lot of pain, but she could not understand what was going on, because blood did not get into her mouth. However, recalling that the boy had touched her wound with the same injured hand, she believes that the pain was provoked by this ingress of foreign blood through the scratch. Trying to stay conscious, the girl continued to claim that she was fine, even though the pain she was experiencing now was very different from the poison in the Grand Duke's blood. She tried to hold on with all her strength so as not to frighten the boy even more, but her body was ceasing to obey her with every passing moment. In a moment, she was on the floor, leaving the guy wondering what had just happened. The Duke, his heir, and his butler were standing next to the girl as she opened her eyes on the luxurious bed. Everyone was concerned about her condition and wondered how she was feeling at that moment. Starting to recall all the events that brought Farashati here, The reason for this was the same powerful poison that Sulfus had. Even though she was experiencing such intense pain at the moment, she was glad to be alive in the end. Looking behind the Duke's back, the Ferashatis heard the answering voice of Sulfus, who could not believe that the girl could survive after such a thing. In response, Tideo approached him, saying that he himself was wandering in the dark, wondering what the reason was that such a poison had no effect on her health. Assuming that the boy was most likely incredibly frightened, the girl was about to turn to him when the Duke interrupted her. Her husband reproached her for showing her defenselessness, even though she could have died from their family's poison. Even though she was able to survive the effects of the Duke's poison on her, she could not know for sure whether Sulfus's poison would be harmless to her. Well aware of her mistake, the girl apologized for her behavior and said that it would not happen again. Now the man had to have a similarly serious conversation with the child, emphasizing that the recklessness of his actions could kill a person. However, the Duke stopped as soon as he saw the crying face of the boy who stood silently next to him. He said that he would now return to the villa arbitrarily, confessing to His Excellency that his words were true. He had already turned in the opposite direction, intending to return to his room and begin preparing to leave. However, Ferashati could not stand aside and let the Lafon family handle their own affairs, because now she owned it. Stopping the boy, the girl wanted to hear the words that Sulfus wanted to say at that moment. Addressing the Grand Duke, she said that when he makes his own mistakes, he needs someone to watch over him so that he does not repeat those mistakes. Sulfus was still a child, and if he made a mistake out of ignorance, it was on the shoulders of His Excellency, who failed to teach him according to the desired result. She realized that she may have made mistakes when she tried to solve problems that were not her own, but when she heard that Sulfus did not want to be alone, she could not stand aside. Ferashati's butler also took the side of the defense, telling His Excellency that it would be nice if he would listen to her opinion when he was about to deny it. She said that if the Duke really wanted to take care of Sulfus, he should listen to his wishes and supervise him so that he would be educated and not just be removed from society. Leaning closer to the girl, Tideo said that she had no guarantees that this would not happen again, and she could not be so sure that she would be able to pull through again. Judging by everything the girl had heard from the Duke, she was also in danger by being around him. The solution to this was that she should just be more careful. Standing between the adults, Sulfus shielded the girl behind him, informing His Excellency that he wished to remain in the manor. In order for the Dukes to really consider this request, the boy promised that he would do his best to prevent such situations from happening again. The child even agreed to avoid meeting him if he wished. When Tideo agreed to let Sulfus stay at the mansion, he asked him if he needed to pick up some things from the house that were outside the city. However, he refused with a twinkle in his eye when he heard this question. In response, the Duke suggested that the boy was full of confidence that others did not know or even guess at their secret. Ordering the butler to prepare everything necessary in the boy's bedroom, the man returned to Ferashati. In addition to preparing the furniture for the proper look, Moulton also said that he would call his partner to take measurements from Selfe. Turning to Ferashati, why is she so strongly involved in such a case? She replied that the events she had recently seen for a moment brought her back to the past. Thus, Sulfus stayed in the capital's apartment. Perhaps it was not the right decision, but watching the smile on his face, Ferashati could only be sure of it. Recalling her last death, the girl assumed that the blood was not swallowed, but rather the wounds that had formed under her fingernails. She had a terrible impression that she could die at any moment because of this, so she decided to get rid of her bad habits and be as careful as possible. After a few days of being busy with her noble duties, a butler approached her and told her that she had a visitor. In the morning, instead of doing her job, she had the opportunity to see uninvited guests. After the incident with Sulfus, Ferashati made a special effort to settle into the Grand Duke's home. She had to get used to the duties of being a member of the Grand Duke's family before their contract was completed, and she had to start establishing connections that would later be useful to her in running the county. Although it was expected that all the servants of the Lafon family would not be happy about the arrival of a new unknown person, this was all too evident in their behavior. The girl had to face their displeased faces, especially often when they accompanied her on errands outside the apartment. But even if the other servants were quite rude to the new member of the Duke's family, fortunately there was Moulton, who eliminated all misunderstandings between the servants and the Grand Duchess. After the incident with Sulfus, the man became much more kind, crossing the boundaries of even the friendly behavior he showed towards Ferashati. Apparently, The man was worried about the fact that the girl was now dead, even though she was standing in front of him. Later, if they maintain their warm relationship, she will need to ask him about the affairs of the Count Zahart family, to which the girl used to belong. During her time as a Grand Duchess, she had to learn that the land with the house in the capital had been taken over by the Lafirions during the reign of the former duke, except for the main one, where the duke most often conducted his business. The apartment in the capital is managed by Moulton's eldest son, so apparently Moulton himself stayed in the capital because of a summons from His Highness. Perhaps because of all the issues related to the wedding, the duke often stayed at the Imperial palace, which is why he returned to his estate late. She also learned that none of the servants in the house knew about the curse of the Lafirion family. The truth was known only to Moulton and some people who were direct descendants of his family. Recently, the butler's youngest daughter joined the knightly order of the Grand Duke. Watching Moulton tell this information to Farashati, one could not miss that the man was incredibly proud of the young knight. Among the facts that the girl learned while staying in this apartment was that Tideo ordered the doctor to periodically take Farashat's blood for analysis. Subsequently, knowing this, the girl herself wondered whether the Duke's family really hoped to find out at least some information with the help of her blood. Farashaka herself was also quite curious as to the reason why the poison did not work on her, but in any case, the Duke was returning too late for them to discuss all the results they had so far. Far from being a matter of fact, Farashati could confidently say that the sofa in the Duke's house felt much nicer than the bed in the Count's estate. Thanks to the abundance of free time she had, she decided to invest it in learning a lot, namely what she would need in her role as a county administrator. The nightmares slowly stopped haunting her, so she was confident that everything would be fine as long as she was away from her family. However, fate was on a completely different side, as the guests Moulton reported were her stepmother and Reina. The girl could not just ignore their visit, because there were a lot of prying eyes around. Farashati missed that the reason for their visit was her uncle, who is now in charge of the Count's family. It is because of him that they cannot enter the main building and spend money as they please.